I want to go across next to N.K. Singh, Chairperson of the 15th Finance Commission of India, and I've just received this outlook from Moody's, and I want to take our viewers through it and then get Mr. Singh to react. As the government unveiled its budget for 25-26 amid a somewhat dampened macroeconomic backdrop as compared to recent years, it had to slow the pace of fiscal consolidation to provide firmer support to growth. In particular, announced tax relief measures have constrained the growth of revenue receipts, which will rise at its slowest pace since 22-23. As such, falling expenditure as a share of GDP has borne the brunt of projected narrowing of the fiscal deficit. The most crucial part of the Moody outlook is that India's fiscal strength will remain weaker than most of its investment-grade peers. So, although the Union government remains on track to meet its near-term policy goals, we do not expect a sufficient improvement in the debt burden or the proportion of the budget earmarked for debt servicing to change our broader assessment, Mr. Singh, that India's fiscal strength will remain weaker than most of its investment-grade peers. Now, the government's big hope, frankly, was that Moody's and other rating agencies will upgrade India's outlook. The initial report that's been put out by Moody's seems to think that that may not be happening anytime soon. The government's big hope, frankly, was that Moody's and other rating agencies will upgrade India's outlook. The initial report that's been put out by Moody's seems to think that Mr. N.K. Singh? Can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you.
Okay. So my question to you was on credit rating agency. I hear you well, sir. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
right. I have got your question.
Super.
May I respond to it now?
Please do.
Okay. So I think that when this question has been raised, I also heard very carefully the last part of what Manish Tiwari had said as a spokesman for the opposition. I wish that a few minutes was given to read the page 12 of the macroeconomic policy statement which the finance minister has laid out. The two charts which are there on page 12 of that macroeconomic statement clearly shows two very important trends. The first and foremost, that fiscal deficit having reached, for the central government alone, over 9%, has come down progressively to the daunting challenge of 4.5%. Equally, if you look at the the trajectory of the debt of the central government, the debt which had really risen to absurd limits is planned to come down to just 50% by 31-32. The rating agencies will all take note of this important fact of a growth, not only sustained growth, manageable inflation, declining fiscal deficit, but most importantly, as you correctly said, a declining path on the debt to GDP coming down in a progressive way. Of course, I agree that perhaps in absolute terms, even at 50%, would be somewhat higher than the trajectory which I had given as the chairman of the Fiscal Responsibility Management Review Committee, which was 40% for the central government and 20% for the states. But we had the pandemic after that. But notwithstanding the pandemic, now the deficit of the debt to GDP of the central government is coming down every year to just above 50%. What is really necessary, if I may say so, is that this is of the central government. Because the World and Rating Agency looks at not only the central government, they look at what is known as the general government. And therefore you need to add the debt and the fiscal numbers of the state governments. And that is going to be requiring a degree of partnership and ability of the state governments to partner with the central government, both in terms of the fiscal glide path and more importantly, the downward trajectory on the debt
No,
to
but the
GDP.
opposition's critique, and I want you to respond to it, is that the fiscal deficit, government spending numbers are being met by not spending. That on important schemes, and I think Mr. Chidambaram said it in his press conference, that on production-linked incentive, on Skill India, crop insurance scheme, on spending on public infrastructure, the government made these announcements. You didn't spend the money, and therefore that's how the fiscal deficit target has been met. How do you respond to Chidambaram?
No, I think that Mr. Chidambaram should look at his own record, and he should look at the fact that the quality of public expenditure has dramatically changed in the Modi era as compared to the kind of record which he had, namely whether as a component of the fiscal deficit, the revenue expenditure was exceedingly high. One of the very creative features of the Modi's management of the finances has been that the capital expenditure as a proportion of the overall revenue expenditure has gone up very, very significantly. We all know, it doesn't require an explanation, that capital expenditure has multiplier benefits over any other kind of revenue expenditure. And therefore, I think we need to also, in addition to the fiscal trajectory and the debt trajectory, recognize the change in the composition of expenditure moving towards larger capital expenditure.
Very briefly, what kind of a multiplier are you expecting from the changes in the income tax slabs and the relief that's been given to the taxpayer, and the impact this could potentially have on spurring growth?
So I think that, well, having been part of the Revenue Department for long, when I served in the Ministry of Finance, I think that what these tax slabs will do is it will dramatically improve the urge for compliance. And therefore, I believe that the revenue buoyancy will go up rather substantially. It has been quite an effort to keep the buoyancy at 1. I see that with these new tax slabs and the new income tax code, which is coming into vogue next week, as she said, I see the rising trend on revenue buoyancy too, which will really enable the government to meet its daunting fiscal challenge and its rising expenditure trend.
Okay, we leave it there. N.K. Singh, thank you for joining us. Whether the rationalization leads to additional tax buoyancy, it will be interesting to see if that pans out in the end. For joining us with your sharp insights, thank you very much. Chairperson of the 15th Finance Commission, veteran bureaucrat N.K. Singh.
Thank you.